Good morning, everyone. My name's Phil Swan. I'm one of the business development managers within the Continuing Professional Development Unit here at Cardiff University. Welcome to the fourth session of the second week of our spring online school organised by the CPD unit. It's great to have so many of you joining us this morning. We've got really good attendance for this session. While we just wait for the last few people to join us, I'm just going to run through some housekeeping with you. If you have any technical problems during the session, please use the chat feature of the Zoom meeting just to raise these with either myself or my colleague Jessica. Anything like sound issues, that sort of thing, and we'll do our best to assist. If your Wi-Fi drops out, we're conscious everyone's probably working from home like we are at the moment. So if your Wi-Fi drops out, please just reuse the link to readmit yourself onto the session. We've got people waiting on the sidelines ready to readmit you. So you won't be interrupting the flow of the session or anything like that. We're looking to do a Q&A at the end of Jane's session. So please, if you've got any questions as the session goes on, use the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom call to put these in, and I'll feed those through to Jane at the end of the session. And then finally, we are going to be recording this session and uploading it onto the CPD unit's YouTube channel, where we've also got a back catalogue of previous sessions we've run during this spring school and also in last year's virtual summer school as well. So do feel free to look at those, and we'll send a link over after this session. So I think that's enough from me. Thank you for everyone for joining us this morning, and I'll pass you over to our fantastic speaker, Dr. Jane Lynch. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you very much, Phil, and good morning from a beautiful sunny Cardiff. I hope it's exactly the same wherever you're based today. We're going to be talking about collaborative working this morning, and this is really just a bite-sized session just to give you a feel of some of what I consider to be some of the key points that will help you with collaborative working. I'm going to share my screen in a moment, and I've also set up a mini survey where hopefully I'll be able to share some of the results of that survey with you during the presentation. But basically I'm a reader for Cardiff Business School in procurement, and I didn't take a naturally academic route into my university role today. I started off in retail as assistant buyer in a variety of different organisations. And that's really where my interest in collaborative working, making it work or not, is really where it stemmed from. And that really moved on to my PhD, and then obviously where I am today. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. And hopefully I'd like you to think that even though this is a webinar, I'd like you to feel that you can pose questions in the Q&A, and you can also raise any comments in chat. And I know that the team here are ready to be able to help you with some of those. So I'm just going to share my screen with you. Hopefully you can see that. Would somebody be able to just pop the link in the survey link into the chat for the participants? That'd be really helpful. Thank you.
I'll do that for you now, Jane.
Thank you, Jessica. Okay, so effective collaboration. There's collaborative working, and then there's doing it effectively. And I feel really passionately about getting these things right. Because to me, it's the make or break of business. And it was really my own experiences in business where we were constantly feeling that you were being let down by suppliers and other people within the organisation, which made me start to think about what is it that makes a good relationship, a good form of collaborative working. This is how I have badged this session for you with some of these sort of key points. Everybody seems to be collaborating these days, but do you often feel disappointed or feel let down? And those are really a reflection of my own experiences and why I'm really passionate about trying to get this right. So, you know, you might feel frustrated by internal departmental tensions, or it may be that it's working with external partners that's a challenge for you, or just really knowing how to get started with this. So, you know, this is where I'm going to go today. So I'd just like to think of you some initial thoughts at the moment in terms of why is everybody talking about collaboration these days? Haven't we always done that? And I think, you know, this is a really important point to raise. Collaboration, collaborative working seems to be the buzzword of the moment, and it seems to be written into most strategies and policy documents worldwide. But actually really understanding the true value that can be achieved by collaborative working, I think is something quite different. And I don't know that that is necessarily always fully understood. So this is why I feel very strongly and passionately about trying to sort of spread the good word in the practice of doing that. As well as being a reader in procurement for the business school, I'm also senior associate for Institute for Collaborative Working, that's ICW. It's just a voluntary role, and basically I do that role because I see lots of good practice and I want to bring that information into Wales, and vice versa. If I see good practice going on in Wales, I want to share it with the rest of the world. And that's my role really with ICW. But a lot of the work behind ICW is around formalising a better process for managing collaborative relationships. And when we say, you know, is it something new? No, it's not something new. We've been talking about it, but in the 90s, it's all about buzzwords and jargon of that particular era. In the 1990s, when I started off as a buyer, it was all about partnerships. If you didn't have a partnership in your business, you know, you weren't in vogue and you weren't going to be a leading organisation. And it was that term partnership that was being used constantly. It made me think, is this really what a partnership's about? Where's the mutual side of this? Or is it just seems to be very much one-sided? In terms of how our relationship is being managed. There seems to be more exploitation than actual relationship management and building trust, and trust being, of course, the foundation of effective collaboration. So collaboration has been going for a long time. It's just that we perhaps termed it differently. So it's just the fact that at the moment, this is what we prefer to call it. Collaborative working is a way that we want to look at this. And do you sometimes wonder why people don't engage in meetings or respond to emails? Something that I'm going to touch on this morning is relating to behaviour. And really understanding behaviour. And those of you that watched Casino Royale for about the 99th time the other night, the poker face, you know, our perceptions on other people's views can be quite skewed, especially now that we've moved to the online environment. Is that it can be very, very difficult to understand what challenges other people are facing when all you're receiving is an email from them, or you're just looking at them on a screen. Very difficult to maybe understand that perhaps they're facing some very difficult challenges, and that can come across in a very negative way. And if it's not managed or understood, it can lead to conflict. So I'll be touching upon that one a little bit. And do you feel that you sometimes have to put in enormous effort for little gain? I think everybody that I speak to who works in organisations where collaboration underpins most of the decision making in their business and a lot of the innovation in their business will completely appreciate that you won't get quick results by collaborative working. Collaborative working is more of a long-term strategy. Collaborative working is about coming together, bringing two or more parties together to share a joint vision, and then think about later how you can add the value within that beyond the contract. So that's really, so you do have to put an enormous amount of effort. Hard grit, I think, is the term that I've heard used before when we talk about collaborative relationships. So there is a lot of effort in there, but it does take, and you will get the gain, but it won't happen initially. It does take time, because ultimately what you've got to try and do is to build that trust in. And what good will collaborative working bring to my project? I think that everybody that I've spoken to says that if you manage the collaborative relationship well, and it is based on mutual benefit, mutual gain, so you share the risk, yeah, basically, if you take that attitude to your collaborative working, then it will bring you enormous benefit later on. What it does is it brings together individuals to work more closely, to have a better understanding of them. Working as a buyer, when you have, say, 3,000 suppliers, it's impossible to really understand the value that can be gained from each one of those suppliers when you're working on a transactional adversarial basis. If you're working on a collaborative basis, which of course you couldn't possibly do with all of those suppliers, you need to think about who you're going to work more closely with, who will bring benefit to your business. And then you can start to explore much more deeper value adding benefits later on as the project matures. So this is a really important aspect. And what are the alternatives? Well, the alternatives that you don't work collaboratively, and it isn't about win-win, it's about win-lose. There's, I wouldn't say always exploitation, but there's an imbalance of power, shall we say, that the company and or the client that you're going to work with today might not necessarily be the one that you work with tomorrow. And so, a typical supply chain relationship. So, really thinking about those alternatives, I don't think that that's really where we want to be today. Today, it's all about working with fewer, but working with them more effectively to deliver greater value for our business. And how do I ensure effective collaboration? Hopefully some of the points that I raised in the session today will help you to understand that. So let's think about some jargon busting first of all, and think about how can we collaborate? So a little bit academic here. I'm just going to move my screen so that I can see everything in there. So collaboration can occur within each organisation and between organisations within the supply chain. So they can be referred to. So within the organisation, across the different departments, your internal clients, as it were, you're looking at cross-functional collaboration. And then across, when you're working with outside businesses, so businesses externally, we can term that as cross-sectional collaboration or supply chain collaboration, as it may be more familiar to you in your own work environment. There are three forms of cross-sectional collaboration, and they can include horizontal, vertical, and lateral. But first of all, I just want to touch on that cross-functional one. One of the messages that I always give out in presentations is that before we can start collaborating externally, so with partners outside of our own organisation, we need to make sure that we get our own house in order first. So what I mean by that is that we need to understand what's going on in our own organisation. And sometimes that's actually the most difficult area to get right. Is particularly, and I don't think that collaboration can be applied any more or less successfully dependent on the size of the business. It can be applied very well if it's managed well and understood. The benefits of collaborative working can be applied whether it's a very small micro firm, a very small business, or whether it's a very large organisation. And it doesn't matter whether it's private sector, public sector. Although there's been some hesitation about whether collaborative working will be effective in the public sector organisations, what we've seen since COVID is that absolutely collaborative working can be managed effectively within public sector organisations. So let's just go through to these different forms of external collaborative working. So if we think about the horizontal, vertical and lateral forms of cross-sectional collaboration or supply chain collaboration. So horizontal collaboration refers to organisations collaborating with the same type of organisations, such as direct and indirect competitors of the company. You may have seen me or may not have seen me on the BBC News recently talking about Brexit. And I said that there's never been a better time to consider collaborating with other organisations. Unfortunately, what you didn't see in that clip was my explanation as to why I think that's important. What we're seeing in the current environment, particularly coming out of COVID, is we've accelerated digitalisation. That means that the level of investment for organisations has never been higher. And particularly for smaller organisations, that level of investment seems unreachable. So one way for us to be able to perhaps achieve that is by collaborating with another organisation where they may already have that digital understanding, that knowledge, that expertise within that company. And the other element, of course, as well as digitalisation, is innovation. Is that collaboration and innovation almost go hand in hand. Two heads are better than one. We're all familiar with that saying. So I think that, you know, when you think about, if we think about digitalisation and innovation, there's never ever been a better time to think about collaborating with other organisations. And when I've worked with organisations to help them get set up in their as a consortia, for example, the first question they say was, how do I protect my IP? What you need to think about in that partner selection is you need to understand why you need to collaborate in the first instance, in that you're each bringing in complementary strengths to that partnership. And if you're doing that, then, and that can be through geography, or it can be that you bring in different levels of resource, or it can be that you bring in different levels of knowledge or expertise, then that will ensure a more equitable and mutual arrangement, and is less likely to lead to conflict. If you don't manage your partnership selection well in horizontal collaboration, and you're all competing on the same strengths, you start to look around the room and think, well, we're missing something here. We need another company coming in here to help us. And it can sometimes cause some problems in terms of competitive leadership. So it can initially, and that could lead to some conflict later on. So it's really important with horizontal collaboration that you start to think about who the right partners are and why you're collaborating is a really important factor. So vertical collaboration involves partnerships with suppliers upstream or customers downstream. And we see this a lot in the automotive sector, the electronic sector. This has been tried and tested. When we say customers, our clients might be a better term of phrase there when we talk about vertical collaboration. So lateral collaboration is if a company adopts both horizontal and vertical collaboration. And we're seeing that very much so in the automotive sector and also in the electronics industry as well. And also in the health sector as well. We're starting to see a lot more of that happening. So all of these are possible. It's just that they need to be managed really well. So if I just go back to defining supply chain collaboration, interweaving components of information sharing, whole congruence, decision synchronization, incentive alignment, resources sharing, collaborative communication, and joint knowledge creation. It all sounds very fluffy, doesn't it? And very much full of jargon. But let's try and think about that in practice. So if you have a little look in the chat, hopefully you can access now the link that's been sent to you. And you can access, there's a little mini survey there. And the first question says, what challenges do you face most with collaborative working? And the options that you've got in that first question are to set up and part of the process of collaborative working, managing the collaborative working systems. So in other words, the digital infrastructure that you use to help the collaboration. Or is it about managing the behaviours in collaborative working? Or is it managing or sharing resources in collaborative working? Or is it more to do with leadership? And those I consider to be the key elements of getting collaboration Right. So if in your time at any moment that you've got now that you're able to actually have a look at that survey and click on that, then I'll be able to hopefully share some of those results with you a little bit later on, to think about some of the key challenges that you might face. So I think if we look particularly at resources sharing and thinking about the collaborative communication and particularly this joint knowledge creation, what do we do with all of that when the project finishes? So a bit of a myth busting here. So is that collaboration goes on forever? Collaboration and the 1990s versions of partnerships is that once we've signed up as a partner, we're a partner for life. It's not like a marriage. The best way to manage collaboration effectively is to treat it like a project. So 12-month, 18-month, 3-year. And it might be that you're going to be working together for the foreseeable future. But let's be honest about this. The objectives of why you're working together will completely change. And that's why it's really important to treat each collaboration like a project. And if you use it in bite-sized stages like that, it will become much more effective. Because otherwise what happens is that things change. Couldn't we even begin to think what February 2020 looked like compared to where we are today and what we've achieved and what our business looks like today? We wouldn't even have begun to think like that. Imagine if you were setting up a project then, which I'm sure many of you were, and then, obviously the COVID crisis hit and we were faced with home working and all of the other challenges that came with it. But also opportunity as well. To maybe do something a little bit different. So, this is the kind of reality that we face in today's world. So we need to think very carefully about how we manage that project. So if we manage the collaborative working in bite-sized stages, so in short periods of time with very clear objectives which we understand, then you'll have a much greater sense of success. And then come the 18-month period or the 3-year period or whatever it is that you decide, you then reevaluate the objectives and then you move the partnership forward that little bit further into a new way of collaborative working. So I hope that makes a little bit more sense here. The other big myth is that everybody is collaborative. If we look at biosciences, then they would say, yeah, everybody is collaborative in our personal world. We tend to want to be with somebody else. It's a natural instinct for us. But applying that in a business context is a completely different scenario. Applying that in a business context, building trust in business is really tough. It takes an awful lot of time. It takes skill. It takes leadership. And it's about, analytical, critical thinking and being able to make decisions. So, this is not necessarily, and sometimes we might send the wrong people in to manage the collaborative relationships because they're the only ones that are available at the time. So if collaboration is really important to your business, you need to think about why collaboration is going to be the right vehicle for you, but B, who you're going to be using to manage that relationship is really important as well. So if you go on to question 2 in the survey, it says there, do you use a framework or a formal process for managing collaborative relationships? And in the majority of cases where I speak to companies, the answer is, well, we do, but it's not necessarily the same every time. So this is always quite alarming, and that's why I'm introducing you to a structured approach. My PhD going back in 2008 to 2015 was based in manufacturing, and I looked at something called supply chain orientation, and it was trying to understand how different departments would have to connect and collaborate to enable a seamless approach within the organisation so that when they manage their external partners, it was much more effective. And when I came across this framework, this was initially the British standard for collaborative working. Since 2015, it's become an ISO standard, and it's based on 8 principles. And I think it's a really important one for us to consider because it's a structured process for managing partnerships. And basically what it does is it takes us through, whether you want to call it a tick box exercise, which is one of my pet hates, but I know we can't avoid saying that sometimes. But if you want to take yourself through the process of managing collaborative working, then this is a very good one for doing that. And some would say, oh gosh, that's far too bureaucratic for me. That involves far too much administration. Well, let's think about it. If you have a product which is high risk and it's important and strategic to your business, then the first thing you're going to do is apply a quality standard to it. Do you apply a quality standard to your relationships? Probably not. And that's exactly what this does. So if we apply a consistent process for managing, whether it's this one or many others, if I typed in to an academic database, frameworks for managing collaborative working, I'd come out with absolutely loads of different frameworks. But this one I know has been tried and tested, and I know that it works, and it can be, and it's adaptable. And I think that's the important thing to think about. So it's based on these 8 principles. It shows you stage by stage about how to set up your partnership, how to align, go back to that quote that I mentioned, how to align your vision. And even if you've got completely different vision, by having a conversation at the outset, it reduces the risk of problems later on in the relationship. So this is all about managing risk in the relationship and to help you to prevent conflict and to make sure that you deliver as much value from the collaboration as you can possibly achieve. So effective collaboration requires long-term thinking, and it's more about the life cycle approach. Strategic insight is key. So understanding each other's strategy, understanding each other's strategic priorities at the outset is really important. If you don't understand that, then you might come across problems later on when you're trying to align your way of working together. Knowledge sharing is vital for the trust element, but what we consider to be important may be less so for somebody else, or more important, or something that we consider to be more important might be less so, or something that we consider to be less important might be more important to somebody else. And so this knowledge sharing can be, a real problem area. So if we talk about what we need to share at the outset, and then think about how we'll manage it at the end, so already we're starting to think about what the exit strategy might look like, then that's the very good basis for building trust in that collaboration. And this is how we'll start to create that value. What is it? How we create it and our perceptions of it. Every single person, the 68 people on the call this morning, and I think we had just under 200 registered, will have a different perception of what value is and what's important to them. If we have these kind of discussions at the outset when we start off our relationship, then we're much more likely to be able to have an alignment of and setting expectations in terms of what we can achieve throughout that duration. Reciprocity, you can't collaborate alone, so it is all about mutual. And to me, this win-win goes beyond the double win. It's more of a triple win or even a quadruple win. There's the win for you, there's the win for whoever it is that you're partnering with, there's the win for the end user of your service as well. So there's your triple win. So it's not just about two organizations coming together to collaborate and deliver something which is better than we would have achieved on our own. This is about delivering something better for the end user of that product or service. So the emphasis here is very much on joint working. Okay, so that's really what we're talking about here. And I would suggest that you would use something like this as the structure of your meetings. And it will help you to address some of these things, because of course, as you go through the project, inevitably some of these things will change. But if you start to address these in the order that they and behind each one of these stages of the 8 principles, actually in the standard you can see a whole set of toolkits. There's a lot of free information available on the ICW website, the Institute for Collaborative Working. But also if you go onto the ISA website, or if you go onto the BSI website as well, you'll find a lot of information about this process. And there's also starting to be a lot of academic studies around it as well. So how can it all go wrong? Understanding behaviours. This is the one. We all understand systems and processes, but very little attention is on behaviours. And my PhD was all about behaviours and really understanding how behaviours influence decision-making within the business. If you look at question 3 on the survey, it asks you, what's your greatest challenge? Is it internal or external? Yeah. So if you wouldn't mind just having a little look through that survey there. I think, one of the challenges here, this is a very well-known framework, you may have come across it before, but it's one to really think about. We've got here assertiveness versus being cooperative. And if you can see, collaborating is on the right-hand side of that. Everything in management seems to be a 2x2 matrix. I don't know if you've noticed that. But basically what we find here is if we've got, the more senior you go in an organization, the more difficult it is to make decisions. Because what you've got is lots of leaders competing, not prepared to move from their position. The ideal place, of course, we want is some element of compromise, which is, I'm sure you know, in any good negotiation is the equilibrium place to be. But when we're thinking about the collaborating and problem solving, we're moving it to a different level altogether. And I think this really highlights how different collaborative working is, and perhaps, maybe underestimated the value of collaborative working. If you're in a meeting though, and you see people who are not giving you any eye contact, or maybe they're demonstrating negative body language, very difficult when we're all online these days. Maybe not always, people haven't got their camera off. I mean, here I am trying to deliver a session on collaborative working via webinar. This is just not how it should be done. But, it's what we've got to do in this current environment, but trying our best. But what you can see here is this avoiding, and quite often I would like to really highlight the importance of understanding these behaviours. Is this avoiding one here is somebody who perhaps has been asked to attend a meeting on the behalf of somebody else. And we've all been put in that position, who perhaps feels that they're not really prepared. They haven't had time to do the reading of all of the minutes of the meeting before they go into that. They perhaps aren't able to make the decisions. So all they're doing is taking a few notes and they're going to go back. Or it may be that actually they are able to make those decisions, and they are, demonstrating avoidance behaviour within a meeting scenario, which comes across as very negative. Now, please always try to think around that. And it may be that that person is actually going through a very difficult period. And sometimes we try not to bring our domestic life into our workplace, but inevitably it does happen. And it can be something as simple as just saying, well, let's go and have a cup of coffee, or let's meet for a walk in the park. At least we can do that these days, and have an informal chat. If you've got somebody that does that, because ultimately one of the critical success factors of collaborative working is involvement, and early involvement, getting people feel valued, so that everybody feels that they have an opportunity to participate in or contribute in some way. And if you've got an imbalance in organisations, say you've got a very small organisation collaborating with a much larger one, then it's easy for them to feel intimidated. And somehow we need to create more of a level playing field, and to make them feel that they have, even if we don't agree with what's being said, is that everybody has an opportunity to say something. So I think don't ever overlook that avoiding one, and definitely don't leave it to foster. One of the things I always used to say to my suppliers at the end of any deal was, are you happy with that? Is there anything that we could have improved on? Because what we don't want is them to sort of have that demonstrate that negative body language, go away, and then come back to you 3 months later and say, I'm really not happy with this. So it's about bringing out those awkward conversations at the outset, rather than waiting for them to fester. And what seems very small at the time can actually add up to multiple of things. The other one, of course, is this accommodating one. You have those meetings, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, just after lunch, or 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, and everybody just wants to get out of that meeting, and they just say, yes, yeah, of course we're going to say yes, just because we just want to finish that meeting and go and stop and finish work. We're all exhausted. That's also a very dangerous one, because you see, what will happen is it'll come back and bite you later on, because if you've got that kind of accommodating, and you've tried to bring things to a close very quickly, then you haven't had that opportunity to really discuss all of the points. So if you're hosting a meeting or chairing a meeting, it's important to really make sure that every single member within that meeting has had an opportunity to say something and feel involved, in that they're feeling valued. When you do all of these things, then you're moving towards that collaborating, that common ground. How can we solve this together? Not alone. And it's just that feeling that importance there. So I think that this is a really important element to consider. There's a whole load more that we can talk about that. I could talk about that for a whole day probably and bore you to tears, but that's really where I am. So in terms of applications of collaboration, I want you to think about why is collaborative working good for me? Okay, so why is it worth for me? So one of the projects I was involved in, my background is in retail, my PhD was in manufacturing, and most of my work now is with public sector, so governments across the world. So I've seen collaboration applied in many ways, and I'm going to give you a few examples of why collaborative working was important in these instances. This is a project that I was involved with a company called ECR Shrink, going back about 3 or 4 years ago, and we worked with the major retailers to think about how collaborative working might help to reduce food waste. So if we get major retailers working with their suppliers, then we could hopefully reduce the food waste. So you can see 4 billion metric tons of food we produce each year, 1/3 is wasted, unused crops, poor storage, logistics. I mean, just to name but a few things. It's completely unsustainable and it's irresponsible. It's not the way that we need to go forward. So there's been lots of studies about applying lean thinking to the dairy industry about reducing food waste through collaborative working. And so we developed that RAP report even further and produced a framework for retailers to apply collaborative working, working in their supply chain to reduce food waste. And there's been some fantastic examples of that, such as Tesco working with potato farmers, looking at the potato crops. Really great examples of that. So that's why they used collaborative working in that instance. In Network Rail are found an organisation of ICW and very much behind the British Standard for Collaborative Working and the International Standard for Collaborative Working. These are the reasons why they apply collaborative working: safety, innovation, standardisation and waste reduction. And these are absolutely critical for that organisation. And that's why working in partnership is essential for them in terms of their way of working. I was involved in a knowledge transfer partnership working with some third sector organisations over the last 3 years. And we applied collaborative working because we were looking at child adoption, and we knew that the current system that was being applied in Wales wasn't necessarily as effective as it could be. And when we tried to investigate it a little bit further, we realised that it was actually the procurement process that was being used that was possibly one of the issues. So we used collaborative working to completely transform the way that adoption services are procured in Wales. And that's now been adopted as a national strategy and is now being considered. It was award-winning, it's been applied. Now the collaborative working was applied in 2 ways in this particular project. It was applied with 3 third sector organisations working together. They'd worked together for many, many years, but had never once stopped to think about why they need to work together and what complementary strengths they bring. So that was an important element of getting those 3 organisations to work together as a consortium, but then also the collaboration between the third sector consortium and the statutory sector, so local authorities. So, huge, completely different governance structures, completely different cultures, and try and get them to work collaboratively. It took quite a long time, but, the results were fantastic in the end. And we've seen some really encouraging results coming from that. And the project still goes on. It's called Adopting Together. So I think that really sort of wraps up. I've got one final question here. Which says in the survey, which says, what would you like to understand more of? And the reason that I say that is because if this is something that interests you and you'd like to understand more, You can go to the Institute for Collaborative Working website, as I've shown you a screenshot of the page here, and there's tons of information on there, and they run their own training program. But also our executive education department, run by Sarah Lethbridge, who's joined us today. If you'd like us to design something for your organisation, then we'd be very happy to discuss that. So the email is available there. You can find me on LinkedIn or Twitter, or all the usual places, the suspect places. We're all very public in the academic world, and that's my email. And I think that's my office phone, but it goes through to Skype for Business, so you're able to call me through that as well. I hope you found that session of interest, and I'm going to open up to some Q&A now. Thank you. I'm just going to unshare my slides.
Thanks very much, Jane. We've got a question here, but just before I read that out, I would just encourage anyone else, if they have any questions, just to post those now using the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom call, and we'll read them out over the next sort of 5-10 minutes or so. So the first question is, it seems to me that trust is implicit and undocumented, etc. So how do you achieve the aims of the structured framework without descending into contracts and SLAs?
Okay, there's quite a few elements to that question. So okay, so let's go on to that. So trust. So trust is I think that the importance of that framework is that it takes you through a very transparent process, and the transparency in itself opens up a dialogue which you probably wouldn't normally have. And in that respect, it helps you to develop that trust. So trust is something that takes quite a long time to develop, but a second to lose. If you start off your collaborative relationship by having these open, upfront conversations, which the 8 principles of working, particularly looking at those first 2 or 3, that would really help you to start to address some of these issues before you even go into contract. And I think the point is that if you're an organisation thinking about collaborating, it's about building the relationship first and then become contract ready. What we currently see a lot is that the contract is what binds a relationship together. And I don't think that that's necessarily a very effective way going forward, because then we become, oh, it's in the terms and conditions, and if it's not written out on the document, then it doesn't necessarily follow. And that's why I say collaborative working is one for the long haul. It's not for the short term. So I hope that helps to try and sort of unpick some of the points that you've raised in that question there. You're on mute, Phil.
Thanks for that. I don't think we've had any more questions come through, actually. So
that's okay. That's great. So what I can do is I can start to share some of the survey results. Excellent. So if I just do that, I can find my Survey Monkey analysis somewhere in here. I haven't even looked at these myself yet, so this is the first time I'm seeing them. So what challenges do you face most with collaborative working? Yeah, everybody says managing behaviours for sure. So I think, don't ever ignore this managing behaviours element of it. One of the behaviours that came out quite strongly in my PhD research was confidence. And it's not something that I'd actually really considered before. Is that particularly where, when I talked about that demonstrating negative behaviour or that accommodating behaviour, and sometimes that's all about an individual's confidence to be able to make decisions. So I think, confidence can be built when you're working with others, but you've got to be confident in them to be able to build that trust. So it's quite a tricky one, really. I think the other one, in terms of managing behaviours is really communication. And particularly at the moment when we've had people homeschooling. I mean, it's been an absolute nightmare for some people home working. I live on my own, my children are grown up, and I'm actually a granny now. I announced that publicly. So exciting. But I think, we're completely challenged now with how we manage behaviours and how we manage communication. Is that the danger is everything ends up going through email. And when you write things in an email, it's not the same as speaking them, is it? There's never ever going to be anything that replaces face-to-face communication. At least we can now meet for a coffee or go for a walk, to be able to discuss some of the more important issues. But I think a lot of us are more comfortable with the online working environment, and there's no doubt that will be part of our working lives for the foreseeable future. So I think there's a whole lot of research that needs to be done in this, in how we can continue to manage behaviours while working online, because it could be that we've turned our cameras off because our Wi-Fi is really poor, or we've got multiple users in a household, and it's not necessarily because we haven't brushed our hair in the morning, or we don't really want to look at ourselves for 8 hours a day, or we just don't really want to look at the other person, or we just want to be seen to be a little bit different in that meeting. So there's a whole batch of new territory that we're entering into here. So I think managing behaviours as it was previously and managing them as they are today is completely different. Leadership is key in collaborative working. If you don't have leaders, a good leader, because ultimately it's the leader that has the insight that's going to keep driving that ambition to make it work. And if you don't have somebody who has got that ambition to make it work, then you'll really struggle to invest the time to deliver the value. And if you don't deliver the value from the collaborative working, people will think, well, what's the point? And it'll go back to the adversarial way of working. So I think that that's a really important point. And where do we actually start setting up? Well, hopefully a framework like that might help you to start thinking about it. But I think the first question you need to ask is, why do I want to collaborate? What will I get out of it? And then think about who might be the right partners for that collaborative working. And then start that conversation, and really do start it with the conversation. In the days when we had networking breakfast events, it was easy to do that. It's more challenging now that we're working online. We'd like to see the day where those those networking events come back. But you can't set up a partnership over a breakfast event. It's the starting point. It's a good way you get that conversation, where you meet new businesses. Doing that online, I accept, is very challenging. So, I'm be happy to talk about how we can take this forward in the new era. So thank you very much for your responses on that one. Do you use a framework or a formal process for managing collaborative working? Maybe or sometimes. But then I think the second question that would be, is it the same every time? And I would probably suggest that in the majority of cases, it's probably not going to be the same every time. So, it's okay to just collaborate, absolutely fine. But if you don't manage it in a formalized way, the danger is that it will have a drift apart at some point. And so, if you haven't got a formal process, you haven't got really accountability for how you're managing your time within that partnership and what you want to get out of it. Is your greatest challenge managing internal every time? I totally agree with you. Yeah, it's always the internal. I mean, as a buyer, you can imagine working with suppliers, and then the supplier doesn't deliver on time, and you think, why didn't you deliver on time? We didn't pay our last invoice. And you go to your finance department and you say, look, I've negotiated, a fantastic settlement here. Why haven't you paid the invoice? Well, the settlement's not enough. We need more, because it doesn't tie in with our finance strategy. So these are some of the huge challenges that we face internally. So, have a think about how, applying a framework like that, a process like that for managing your internal collaboration. But ultimately, that's got to start from the top of the organisation, from the chief exec. If they think that internal collaboration is important for your business, then absolutely critical. But hopefully, with the investment in digital infrastructure at a pace that we've never seen before, will help you to achieve that at a much quicker pace than perhaps would have previously. And you'd like to understand a little bit more about managing behaviours and leadership in collaborative working. By all means, if you want to get in touch with us through the email that I shared just now, I can just pop that back on the screen for you to be able to share again. Hopefully you can see that. Let me just screen share that again for you. Then that's how you can get in touch with us again. I can see we've got another question.
Yes, we've got another question. In The Good and the Great, which I believe is a book, Jim Collins talks about anchor draggers who ultimately never accept or propose necessary change. How does Jane address this issue?
Never address or propose necessary change. I don't think anybody can avoid change today, can they? How do you convert people who aren't converted? And I think that maybe is more of the question that we're asking here. People who are, as I say, there's a myth, that everybody's collaborative, and also the fact that people are all accepting of change, and that isn't the case at all. A lot of people cope with change better than others. And I think that change management is an important area for organisations to address in the current environment, for sure. I don't know whether we offer something, Sarah, in the current executive portfolio, but definitely I would urge change management. I think to convert people, one of the first questions, if I was going into an organisation where change management, or we were trying to implement something different, we've first got to get everybody to understand why we need to work differently. And I think the illustrations that I gave of why companies collaborate just shows the sort of the vast range of reasons why collaboration is really important. And I think, can any business afford not to change today? But it doesn't make it any easier for the people who find change really difficult. And I really do sympathise with that, because not everybody, finds that a very comfortable environment. But it's how you manage change. Change doesn't always have to be radical. It can be managed, in a much more incremental. But I think the role that you place with individuals in part of that change process is important. So I think, if you've got an organisation which knows it needs to change, but you've got individuals who won't change, then you probably need to bring somebody externally in to that organisation. And even if they produce a report and it's not really accepted, the seeds will be planted and the change will be inevitable, because it's a forced hand in the current environment. I can see there's a chat here. Somebody's saying, well, thank you, Sarah. Sarah's wrote into chat here, our executive MBA, Master of Public Leadership and our LBA programme all deal with how you manage and deal with change. So yeah, I think, I hope that helps to answer your question. In terms of change, but I think it's much more about how we bring people along the journey, and bringing people along the journey is about keeping them involved. It's about having open and transparent communication is really important for that. But no, change isn't easy. I agree, Sarah. Very, very difficult. Or you just have to accept that some people are not, prepared to change, but ultimately the organisation has to go at a pace to remain competitive. So yeah, I think change management and project management are the two really important skills that I don't think you can ever get enough training on really in your organisation. And if you do that in-house, or whether you bring somebody from outside or you come to a university like that, like us, then hopefully. I mean, I've sat in many sessions where people start with their arms folded, that typical scenario. They're flickering about with their phone, they're looking all around the room, they really don't want to be there. And I just find it much easier to I just simply go to them and ask them a question. And it's in a way it's quite cruel, but in another way it's about getting them involved. And when you start to actually challenge them with that question and ask them that question, to try and get them involved in the discussion. What's your view on this? Do you agree with what's been said so far? Even if it's something as very subtle as that, then actually you might find that the people who are more resistant to change, there's other things going on there, that perhaps they just feel very nervous about the whole change process, or they just think, oh gosh, here we go again, another change. And, we're going to do all of this work and then in 6 months' time, we're going to change it again. Yeah, we probably are. And that's the reality of work today, isn't it? I think that's where we are today.
Can I ask a question, Jane? So
yeah.
I couldn't post in the Q&A box. So there's all, in the stories and headlines about, all these contracts going to different people that people know, and to some extent procurement is how do we free up procurement so that we are more innovative. Can you talk a bit about what you're seeing is happening at the moment, in terms of procurement and the pandemic and these hasty contracts, and how collaboration and relationships can sometimes have a good role to play, but sometimes it can go a bit wrong. I think
that's a hugely sensitive topic, and I did anticipate that somebody might ask that. I was reading the news headlines this morning on it, and what do I think about it? I think unethical procurement is unforgivable. I don't think there is ever going to be an excuse where there hasn't been the appropriate channels applied. You need to be trialled, of course, properly and fairly. At the moment, there's an awful lot of speculation. I dare say there's an awful lot of evidence floating about as well. Unethical procurement is unforgivable. And particularly, on any scale, it doesn't matter how much it's for, really, whether it's 100 million or whether it's, £10. It's not acceptable. It has to go through the appropriate channels. And I think that, what we have learned from the pandemic is that there needs to be a much greater understanding of the supply chain and supply market. So I think what we have really learned, and what public sector have learned, is that they were very much, the procurement department was very much siloed with the supply market. And I can hear some public sector people online maybe screaming at me at this moment, but just purely because they haven't got the resource. Or they might not have the right skills. So this localization, what we're going to see now is a shift and a move towards more localized procurement, or a better understanding of what the local supply market might look like. And that might mean conducting study of supply chain voids. Now, in the private sector, that's all part and parcel of what we do. We all know who our competitors are, and we all know what the supply market looks like and how it's shaped on a constant basis, because that's survival in the private sector. In the public sector, it's a very different process, in that the invitation to tender goes out and then the bids are invited in. And what's obviously under criticism here is that hasn't necessarily followed the process. What we have learned, though, is that there needs to be a greater understanding. I was at the recent IPSERA conference, the International Purchasing and Supply Conference, and somebody mentioned in there, what we don't see is, we see a lot of public sector procurement, and we see, lots written about public sector procurement, but we don't talk about public sector supply chains. So in Wales, for example, the supply chain side of things has been very much, supply markets very much managed by the Department for Economy and Transport. And they've done an absolutely sterling job in Wales of bridging the gap between procurement and supply, bringing together. And what we see are initiatives such as SBRI, and we have the Challenge Fund initiatives going on. I think we need to see a lot more of that going on. And that's really going to be my diplomatic response to your questions there. I hope that helps.
Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Jane. I think that's all the time we've got left for questions.
That's okay.
I think you've touched in your presentation about the executive education team in the business school. So yeah, we've been kindly told by the exec ed team that they are offering a discount on some of the courses, so the Lean Six Sigma and the LBA as well, for participants, attendees of this session. So what we do is in the email, the follow-up email that we send out, we send links to some of these courses for people to have a look at. So I think that's just left for me for now. So a big thank you to Dr. Jane Lynch for her interesting insights into this area. Also very much thank you to the attendees as well. For coming. We've had really strong numbers for this particular session. We'll be sending out a feedback questionnaire at the end of the week. We'd be really grateful for any feedback that you have on the session that you attended today. We do carefully look at these and sort of consider them for future formats of similar events we run. So once again, thanks very much, Jane. Thanks very much for everyone for attending.
Thank you. Thank you for organising.
No
Bye-bye
problem.
for now. Enjoy